Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brian Pratt. I'm the Mayor of Tidworth. I'd like to welcome you first of all to Tidworth Community Centre, which is owned by Tidworth Town Council. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to Castledown FM for all of the work. Where's Barry in particular and Steve G. I'd like to say thank you to both of those for all of the hard work that they put into, but obviously everybody else, the crew. We are being filmed this evening and there is some recording going on, so if I could ask you to get your coughs and sneezes out of the way, your chair shuffling out of the way, because I'm actually going to try and get quite a good quality recording out there if we can. We're not expecting the fire alarm. We're not expecting any fire alarm, so if you do hear one, the exits are through those doors or through those doors. If you need to use the facilities, they are actually in the corridor that you came down this evening. And also, please, as I just said, turn your mobile phones off, but no recording on your mobile phones, if you would please. Otherwise, over to you guys, over to Steve. Steve here is our host for this evening. Of course, thank you to Steve, and good luck everyone, and enjoy yourselves this evening, that's the main thing. Thanks for coming.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much indeed. Can I add my own welcome to Tidworth Community Centre for this hustings for the general election of 2019, brought to you by the team at Castledown FM. As Brian said, my name is Steve Veer, and as well as chairing tonight's event, I'm also an active volunteer at Castledown as a radio presenter. I won't tell you to tune into me on a Sunday afternoon because we're not here to hear about me. We're here talking about lots of other things this evening. Just a couple of things. In the event of an emergency, like the speaker blowing up, we'll be running in that direction over there, which is the brown door with the fire exit sign, which Barry is currently standing by the side of. The event, as Brian has said, is being recorded both audioly, and we are hoping to replay that on Castledown FM in the near future, and also we have a cameraman this evening as well, so hopefully he'll catch my best side. The best debate, of course, is one where candidates are heard, the points are made, but respect at all times is maintained by both the candidates this evening, but of course you as the general public, and we are incredibly grateful for you to be supporting us this evening. In the event that things get overly excitable, which I'm sure it won't, but in the event that it does, what I'm going to do, I'm going to invite you to join me in a round of applause just to really signal that is the final time where the candidate needs to bring their conversation to a close, but I'm sure we won't need to use the conversation because I'm sure on my prompt the candidates will end what they need to say at that particular point. Just to let you know the format of this evening before I introduce you to our esteemed panel, we'll have 5 minutes opening speech from each parliamentary candidate this evening, followed by a series of questions which has been submitted to the event organiser prior to the course of prior to this evening. I'll then, hopefully, if time allows, be able to open it to the floor at various points for some follow-up questions. Please, we will be passing a microphone to you, so just give us a moment before start speaking in order to make sure the sound catches up. We've got some great expertise behind the scenes this evening. We just need to make sure the technology catches up with you before you start with your follow-up question. And then after all the questions have been asked, to make sure that you do get home at a reasonable time, we will then have 3 minutes of closing comments from each parliamentary candidate. It gives me great pleasure, therefore, to introduce you to our panel. First of all, can I introduce you to Emma Dorney, who is the political economist who's lived in Wiltshire since the age of 5. She went to school in the area before going to Cambridge to gain her PhD in material science and then becoming an MBA at the London Business School. And Emma stood for the Green Party in the constituency we're talking about since 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, Emma Dorney. To my right, Danny Kruger, who was born in South Africa to bake-off star Pure Leaf. Danny has worked and set up many charities for young people, and the Only Connect charity, working with those in prison or recently released to help the lives of crime-free lives. Danny was speechwriter to David Cameron, advisor to the Department of Digital, Media and Sport, and more recently political private secretary to Boris Johnson. And of course, Danny is standing for the Conservative Party. Ladies and gentlemen, Danny Kruger. the lady to my left-hand side, Rachel Schneider-Ross. Rachel has lived in Pewsey Vale for the past 25 years, I'm told, and has worked in business for more than 30 years, very active in her village, trustee for charity for the homeless called Open Doors in Devizes. Rachel has been a community activist and chairperson for the Labour Party in Devizes before being selected as their candidate for this election. Rachel Schneider-Ross. The lady right at the end, of course, Jo Waltham, who's lived in Wiltshire since 2013. She runs her own Wiltshire-based web design company that helps small businesses and charities. Jo became politically active after the referendum in 2016. Jo's very passionate about education and especially special educational needs. And Jo is standing for the Liberal Democrats. Ladies and gentlemen, Jo Waltham. A reminder then, ladies and gentlemen, that the format for this evening will be I'll invite each parliamentary candidate to open for 5 minutes before turning to our questions, which some of you have submitted, and we'll be turning to you in turn, so hopefully you'll have your question at the ready and I will point in your direction in due course once I find you, and then of course at the end of the evening the closing statements. In terms of fairness, the opening statements will be delivered in alphabetical order, which means I'm going to start therefore with Emma. So opening statement, Emma, thank you.
11 years. 11 years. That's all we've got to turn our juggernaut of an economy around to prevent irreversible, damaging changes to our climate. The United Nations has put together expert scientists from around the world, and this is what they've told us. Furthermore, they've told us that the ambition in the 2015 Paris Agreement needs to be 5 times higher to have a chance of staying below 1.5 degrees warming. 5 times. However, the UK is not on track to meet its next target, let alone a target 5 times higher. I read in the Financial Times this morning that another UN report concludes the window is closing to prevent the worst effects of damaging climate change. It's getting worse all the time, the news. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a climate emergency. Leaving this to private enterprise to solve will not work. The costs of polluting the planet are not what economists call internalised, which means it just isn't profitable. We propose a tax on carbon with the proceeds distributed as an income to everyone. Mr. Hammondon, ex-Chancellor, calculated the necessary measures to obtain net zero emissions would cost £1.4 trillion. Our calculations give a similar result, and we propose spending £100 billion a year to obtain net zero by 2030. This will create good, purposeful work all around the country, installing onshore and offshore wind turbines, solar and tidal power stations, insulating people's homes and workplaces, electrifying and improving public transport, and investing in research and development to aid industry and farming to transition to net zero, and also to capture and store carbon. We need to start now. And we have Boris Johnson, who is refusing even to join a leaders' debate to discuss climate at the moment. The Green Party understands science and has policies based on evidence. We tell the truth. Our policies are developed with input from experts. I'm a Cambridge graduate and I have a PhD in material science and MBA, and economics has been my passion for the last 2 decades. I'm not your best candidate for opening country fetes or having cocktail parties, and I don't want to spend my time treating the symptoms of our failed system by doing charity work. I want to treat the root causes of our failing system, which stem from a lack of understanding about how the economy works. Economics is not a science. It's not possible to predict the future, as much depends on people's behaviour. However, some myths in economics need to be busted. One is that government spending is constrained by tax income. It is not. A government in a country like ours, with its own national currency, can always borrow at reasonable rates. The current 10-year borrowing rate is 0.75%. Businesses can't borrow at anything like such low rates. Austerity, the awful spending cuts we've had over the last 10 years, was never necessary. People have died and are still dying from this policy. And furthermore, it means people understandably don't want money spent tackling climate change when it appears there isn't enough money even for key services like the NHS. But they've been conned. There always was enough money. So think about the Second World War. Did we stop to ask if we had the money to fight the war? No, of course we didn't. We just did what we had to do. How many soldiers could be trained quickly? How quickly could factories be transformed to start making munitions? Manpower, not money, was and is the true constraint. Ladies and gentlemen, government cuts were not an economic necessity, but a political choice. When other parties speak of things like fiscal discipline, they're either lying or they don't understand. Governments like ours can always find the money when they want to. Now, we need to reverse austerity and invest to enable a zero-carbon economy. Only the Green Party really gets this. For your children's future, vote Green.
Emma, thank you very much indeed. Danny Kruger.
Thank you. Are you happy with me standing, sitting, or should I stand? Sit. Happy sitting. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm Danny Kruger. A quick word about myself. I wasn't born in South Africa, but I do have South African parents, and I grew up in the Cotswolds on a farm there. Most of my career has been spent working on community projects. I started a charity with my wife Emma, who's here, working in prisons and with ex-offenders, and subsequently a project working with children and young people. I've also worked in politics, and as you heard, most recently in Boris Johnson's team. My priorities for the area and why I would love to be MP here. There's a huge amount to do. The funding is now pouring back into public services, but it's not reaching rural communities sufficiently. There is a problem with the way that the funding is allocated, and that it prioritises too much the towns and the big cities. We need to ensure that the money that's now being released for policing, for health and education, properly supports our market towns and our rural communities. That is a priority. Secondly, to support our environment, this glorious landscape that we're in, this amazing ancient chalk downland needs protection, and I will do everything I can to ensure that as we leave the EU, we create an environmental policy and a farm subsidy system that supports our rural economy and tackles the huge challenge of climate change that we've been hearing about. And thirdly, the military. This is a military area. It's a tremendous thing that the troops are coming home to be based again in Wiltshire from Germany. And I'm impressed by what I understand has been happening. The Wiltshire County Council has been investing in new homes. It's a shame, and I understand the government has not done enough to ensure that there are adequate infrastructure and wider services to support the military and their families in this area. So I would lobby hard to ensure better treatment for our service personnel and their families. I also think it's outrageous that our criminal justice system, our state prosecutor, is pursuing veterans for acts supposed to have taken place 40 years ago in Northern Ireland, when we have genuine murderers and killers who've been released under the Good Friday Agreement, and some of them in political office, while our soldiers are being pursued through the courts by our own prosecutors. And I support the pledge made by the Conservative Party to introduce legislation to protect our soldiers. On wider national policy, I'm a Brexiteer. I voted to leave in 2016, and I am 100% behind the Prime Minister and his plan to get us out of the EU in January if we can get a majority in this election and get that legislation through, which we will be able to do. And beyond Brexit, and one of the primary reasons for wanting to get this bill through is that we want to get so that we can move beyond this paralysing, terrible political conflict that we've been in for the last few years, and see Brexit delivered and focus once again on the priorities that the people have. Chief among which for me is investment in all parts of the country. Our country is too weighted financially and politically in terms of wealth to the southeast of England, and we need to spread prosperity and spread opportunity, and we will do that through a whole range of policies. There's no simple solution, but investment in the infrastructure that will level up growth and job creation across the country is an absolutely vital priority for me. I don't think there is unlimited money, but it is true that it's possible now to invest in a way that it wasn't while we repaired the damage that the Labour government had left us in 2010. So, lastly, the choice at this election is really clear. You have in Boris Johnson someone who's not to everybody's taste, but he is a leader and he has a plan. And he will lead us out of the EU, and he will invest in our public services, and he will do everything he can to be the centrist, one-nation conservative that he actually is, and that his record as London Mayor demonstrates, and he will bring our country together. The alternative is a radical, far-left Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn, with a whole range of policies which are contrary to the traditions of this country. And I'm afraid to say that a vote for anybody else but the Conservatives is a vote to support Jeremy Corbyn in power, because the other parties, SNP, but also the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, will support Corbyn in Parliament if they have the numbers. So the choice is between Johnson and Corbyn, and I invite you, please, to consider the future of our country and the disunity and the division that will prevail if we have more years of arguing about Brexit. You have in Corbyn somebody who won't even decide what his Brexit policy is. And I will stop there because I'm being shouted at. I'm being waved at.
Danny, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just to confirm, ladies and gentlemen, of course, reactions are absolutely fine and probably natural. We just need to make sure that each candidate is heard correctly from the audience. Thank you. Moving on then to our third opening statement, this time from Rachel Schneider-Ross. Rachel.
So I'll start with a bit of background about myself and then share with you what Labour would bring to Tidworth and to the whole constituency, this wonderful and very large constituency that we live in. So I live about 25 minutes from here, and that's been my home in Wiltshire for the last 25 years. I'm a working mum and a local businesswoman. In fact, our office was based down at Crawley, very near here, about 10 minutes away. My work's involved me travelling all over the world, but particularly to Europe, and I work at board level with executives on equalities and leadership. And about 40 years ago, as I was reminded the other day, I studied French and German at Cambridge University. So, remembering key moments in history, I was reminded at Armistice Day actually recently that after World War II, we rebuilt Britain with a Marshall Plan for post-war Europe. And in fact, the refinery at Fawley, Southampton, where I worked in industrial relations, was built with that Marshall Plan money. And I believe that we have again reached a crucial moment in history with this general election. And we have to rise to that moment in history. The challenge of the climate crisis demands no less. So I believe we need to make a big investment in Britain and honour those, like my grandfather, who saw active service in World War II and created peace in Europe. In their name, I think we are being asked to choose what kind of country we want to be. And 2 years ago, I was so disheartened with the direction that my country was heading in, I decided to stop shouting at the telly and to do something about it. So I joined the Labour Party, whose values of community, equality, fairness and respect were the same as my own. I got involved in local community issues, and for a few years now I've been volunteering in my community. I'm a trustee with a couple of charities locally for homelessness and young people, so I see at first hand when I volunteer out in the streets of Devizes and Marlborough and elsewhere the impact of 10 years of austerity. But my real wake-up call politically was working with parents in the community, campaigning to overturn a decision led by Wiltshire Council to close 2 outdoor education centres in Marlborough and Devizes. And I'm pleased to say that parent power and good organisation won the day, and those places remain open now for our children and grandchildren. So now I find myself a campaigner for real change. So let's think about, what does Labour offer us here in Tidworth and beyond? Our Brexit policy is actually very simple. We will go back to the people for a final say on Brexit. The Tories and the Brexit Party want to crash out with a hard deal, a hard Brexit, and that will decimate our farming and businesses as well as the environment. And the Lib Dems want to revoke, which for me feels like a bit of a slap in the face to the 52% who voted to leave. Labour, it seems to me, has chosen the middle ground. But there is so much more there is so much more than Brexit that we want to achieve. Let's please stop talking about Brexit, people tell me. On the doorstep, this is what I hear about. A health and social care system that's been chronically run down. We now have 53,000 nurses and doctors vacancies. And child poverty, as you may have seen in the papers today, set to rise to a 60-year high. Labour will save the NHS from further privatisation and will provide free personal care for our elderly, as is already the case in Scotland. And here in Tidworth, we've seen the impact of that creeping privatisation on our public services. It's hit our armed forces personnel hard, especially when it comes to housing or waiting times for doctor's appointments and soldiers' pay. We will make mental health and housing a top priority, particularly for our local military veterans, to give our veterans the support that they need after serving their country. I will continue to fight for resources for our armed forces so that we really follow through on all of our commitments to the Armed Forces Covenant. I'll fight for local schools, as I did locally with Braeside and Oxenwood, and for youth services, which have been cut back to really unsustainable levels now. People locally here have been telling me that they worry about young people.
And Rachel, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Jo, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Jo Waltham and I'm standing for the Liberal Democrats in this, the constituency I moved to in 2013 with my husband, my children, my dogs and my small business. Being an MP was never on my personal agenda until now. I'm not a career politician, but I'm standing because I'm appalled by the lurch to the left of the Labour Party and to the right by the Conservatives. I believe in the moderate, open and tolerant society that the Liberal Democrats have always stood for. I'm standing because the social contract is broken. Working hard is no longer a guarantee of a warm home to live in, food on the table, health and social care when you need them, and a good education for your children. And no matter what Johnson and Farage say, Brexit will not fix this. It will only make matters worse. Remaining in the EU is about protecting jobs, and it's about identity, and it's about opportunity for our children. I've been lucky enough to live, work and study in another European nation, and I want the same rights and the same freedoms for my children. I do not want my country to become a low regulation, low tax, no public services offshoot of the USA. So when the snap election was called in 2017, I joined the Liberal Democrat Party because they offered a clear Remain voice and a referendum on the deal. In March, I was very honoured to be selected as their candidate for this constituency. While stopping Brexit was what got me involved, it's not the only thing I care about. Locally, I've campaigned to reduce the travel times for children with special educational needs and against the closure of Rowford Special School in Devizes. I've also been involved in the Liberal Democrats' motion at Wiltshire Council to declare a climate emergency. The most important message from climate scientists is that we need to start worldwide reductions in greenhouse gas emissions immediately. We know how to do it. We just need the political will. And we can't delay any longer. Finally, I'm proud of the close links that the Devizes constituency has with the armed forces. Liberal Democrats support the Armed Forces Covenant and ongoing work to support veterans' mental health. We must look after those people who have served our nation. With many military personnel moving back to Wiltshire, we also commit to improving the quality of service housing by bringing the MOD into line with other landlords, giving tenants the same legal rights to repair and maintenance as private tenants. So that's a few things that matter to me. What I want to hear now is what matters to you.
Joe, thank you very much, and of course thank you to all of our candidates for those opening speeches. I think, if my hearing had not failed me, hear a couple of pings on mobile phones during the opening speeches, so can I just ask you to double check that you definitely have switched off your mobile phones, please, ladies and gentlemen, because we'll hear it again when we play it back later on the audio, so just double check for me. Thank you very much indeed. So as I said at the start, we're now going to move on to the questions that have been sent to us previously from some of you that are in the audience, and hopefully, if I've got this right, there are some of you that are here this evening that have submitted the questions. We have sequenced the reply to the questions to make sure that we're fair to each candidate as we go through each. So in the first round, the first person to answer will be Joe, followed by Rachel, followed by Danny, and followed by Emma. And our first question is on military and defence and comes from Charlotte Wildgoose. Is Charlotte in the audience? Haven't been told that she's not here, but I will present the question on behalf of Charlotte. So with the creation of the Office of Veteran Affairs, what do you see as the greatest challenges for veterans in the constituency, and what more can you do to support them and their families? With the creation of the Office of Veteran Affairs, what do you see as the greatest challenges for veterans in the constituency, and what more can you do to support them and their families? Joe.
Thanks, Charlotte. Well, hopefully you'll listen to this on the radio later if you're not here. Well, as I said in my opening speech, that we support the Veterans Armed Forces Covenant, sorry I get the right words, and all the work that I know that goes into supporting the mental health of veterans and so on. I think there's a lot more that could be done, and I think we need to invest in our mental health services, and that's definitely a Liberal Democrat policy, is to have mental health on parity to physical health. I'm also aware that a lot of people are returning back to this area, and you've got the housing, which is great. I've seen lots of new houses as I was driving through Tidworth earlier, but I understand that you are lacking in services such as doctor's surgery, dentistry, and I was recently asking for some information on how the schooling is going here. With 65 new families returning to the area a week, that's rather an additional increase for this community to cope with. So that's just a few things. So obviously with the Liberal Democrats, we're planning a lot of investment in infrastructure, and that would continue into this area too.
Joe, thank you very much. Rachel, can we come to you?
Yeah, sure. So picking up on that point about mental health that Joe raised there, so there was a study done not that long ago actually which reported that there were very high numbers relatively of mental health disorders amongst veterans, and I think that this is something that we've absolutely got to face into. I mean, I'm sure some of you will know the statistics of homeless veterans, people living on the streets, 9,000 or so across the UK, seems to me to be absolutely wrong on so many levels. So we've got to honour our veterans and treat them with respect and as the heroes that they truly are. I was talking to a soldier recently, and he said, it feels like we're serving you, but you're not serving us. So when we come back, we're not feeling well looked after. So for Labour, that would be a huge priority. And I think also I would mention the fact that Labour has said it will look after veterans in particular around housing and make sure that they are housed without, worrying about finding somewhere to rent and so on. I mean, the whole issue of housing is a really big one for military personnel, as you know, and perhaps we'll come on to that later. But to me, it's about treating people as heroes, They've served our country. They should not be sleeping on our streets, as some are, and experiencing mental health. Well, I've got the statistic here. It's 9,000 are estimated to be sleeping on our streets. That was in a report I read recently. Another thing that a local mentioned to me recently that, and this is a serving.
Sorry to do this to you again, Rachel, but I do need to stop you there.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
We'll have lots of opportunity to respond further, I'm sure. Can I move then, please, to Danny?
So, thank you. I recognise the huge challenge that ex-service people face, and there is a problem with homelessness among ex-service people. I'm not sure how pronounced it is in Wiltshire. It's something that I would probably want to understand. I know that the council does take this issue very seriously, but nationally it is a major problem. And my work in prisons confirms that there are way too many people serving in prison who are ex-forces as well. So something is going wrong for many people as they leave the army. Just quickly, and I'd echo the points about mental health and housing, but just another perspective. I met a young man near Pewsey the other day called Josh, who had lost both his legs in Afghanistan, and he described the most depressing stage of his rehabilitation was not the moment that he woke up and realised he'd lost his legs. It wasn't the months of rehabilitation he had to go through. He had nothing but praise for the NHS and for the army and the way they supported him. What was most depressing was when he came out and got a job working for the PLC, which has been contracted to manage army recruitment, and he spent a year in a call centre in this most soulless job, working not for the army or for the community, but for this company which was mismanaging the whole process of army recruitment. So there is a genuine problem with the way that the army is supporting some of its ex-service personnel, and I just think that contract is fairly disgraceful. What he said was changed his life around was when he met, through his own network, through his girlfriend's father, a local employer, which is where I met him, who runs a furniture restoration business outside Pewsey. Met this young man, saw promise in him, and Josh is now employed, fully tax-paying, supporting his children, contributing to the local economy. And he got that job through his network and through businesses which were able to support him. And so my simple answer, although it's not simple to do, but it's the fundamental thing, is we need really effective integration of the community here, businesses, civil society and the council, to make sure that people who are coming out of the army get the support that they need.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And Emma, please. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. The people that have put their lives on the line for this country, we should be looking after. And I think that the cuts that we've seen in government spending all over, are also a problem. So, and I believe some of the veterans are being looked after or helped by various charities. Well, why? Why is that charity work? Why is it not state-funded work? And why is the government not paying for that? We shouldn't, in my view, be using charities to help these people. The veterans, should be looked after, properly and with all the help that they need. So, yeah, that's my view.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Emma and our second question, and after I've taken this question that came to us this evening, can I just see if John McConnell is in the audience, is he? John, I have your question here. If you have it, you'd like to present your question to us? Fine, okay, I've got it here, Simon, it's fine, thank you. So John would like to ask, and we're starting with Emma this time, will you support the Armed Forces Covenant and also help to put an end to the hounding of our 70-year-old veterans by get-rich lawyers? Our armed forces did not choose to be serving in places like Northern Ireland, but were sent there by our government. What a fantastic job our armed forces do for our country. From John McConnell, who's a local town councillor in Wales.
So, yeah, very similar to the last question, but if you're referring to the problems sort of from 40 years ago in Northern Ireland, I think one of the things that really influences me is remembering that in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela bringing people together with the peace and reconciliation. And I think it would be so great if we could find closure and get people to actually, without fear of being put into prison, to actually talk about what happened honestly. The Green Party in general, our view on the justice system is that we shouldn't be locking people up unless they're a danger to other people or to themselves. And otherwise we should be finding some other method of restorative justice and things. So that would be our take on justice in general.
Emma, thank you very much. Coming then to Joe, please.
Hi John. Yes, I just sort of said in my opening statement that the Liberal Democrats do fully support the Armed Forces Covenant and all of that. I remember growing up during the Troubles, and funnily enough I was actually working in Harrods in the 90s, and someone left a bag right by my checkout, and I remember being very fearful. So I know it sounds like very trivial to what our armed service did, but I kind of do have an emotional feeling about that time, and I was amazed that peace has been mostly effective, and I think pursuing our soldiers who were working at that time is not the best use of our time. I think, as Emma sort of said, we need to have a real open and honest discussion. What happened? Let's find out. But I think dragging people now through the courts is not the best use of our time. It should not be where our focus is.
Joe, thank you very much. Moving on to Rachel, thank you very much.
So I'm going to focus on the armed services, the Armed Forces Covenant, sorry, a little convent, yeah, that's a Freudian slip maybe, the covenant, yeah, not much of that around here, I'm sure. So what is the covenant? Because not everyone, I think, realises what it is and how important it is. I did a little bit of research and spoke to a few people about it and found out how important it is. So it's a promise to service personnel and veterans that they'll be treated with fairness and respect in the community. And Wiltshire has a long history of pledges in this area. But what's actually happening sort of day to day and in our streets and lanes, how does that actually show out? Well, I think with the rebasing and the numbers coming back, we're really finding there's quite a strain on the covenant in that sense. How easy is it to access doctors quickly? Well, I hear that there are waiting times of 5, 6, 7 weeks for an appointment sometimes. What about... well, we're hearing different voices, aren't we? So we're also finding that, of course, Tidworth House is a wonderful resource, but more needs to be done. I've heard that mental health support just isn't sufficient for people who are coming back with really quite complex problems, and that there isn't enough support, really good, high quality support. So that's something I think we do need to look into. So the covenant is there to protect, it's there as a promise, but we need to take it even more seriously and talk to military personnel themselves, I think, to find out how do we make it a reality.
Rachel, thank you very much.
As well.
So what we have is 2 minutes of an answered question. We do need to move on for fairness. I'll give the audience the opportunity to respond though, so just give me a moment. Danny will answer in fairness, and then we'll open it up to the floor for a return. So Danny, over to you.
So we should absolutely support and indeed strengthen the military covenant, and the Conservative Manifesto commits to doing that. And in terms of the litigation being pursued against our former soldiers in Northern Ireland, we should absolutely protect our soldiers from this unfair litigation. We don't know exactly what happened 40 years ago, and we will never know. But we do know that genuine killers, people convicted of murder, have been released into our streets, and as some are serving as politicians now. Meanwhile, our prosecution system is pursuing British soldiers. So that has to stop, and we have committed to introducing legislation to protect our soldiers against vexatious litigation in Northern Ireland and elsewhere.
Danny, thank you very much indeed. So in fact, most recent comments would suggest on a report in August that I've just said that actually the local area, the waiting time is as little as 2 weeks. So I do want to open up to the audience, and I think we have got... Okay.
This lady can't get an appointment with a doctor that she sees all the time until January. When I phone up, I can't get an appointment for weeks either. And that's from Tidworth.
Yeah.
We've got one surgery left. They've got extra doctors in, but if you've got complex conditions like me, you need to see a doctor that knows you, because all you get shoved at you is try this drug, try that drug, because that's all they want to do. The doctor that knows me, I can't get an appointment with her ever.
I'm certainly seeing some nods around the room, and I think there was a question that was asked from both sides of the table in terms of which surgery we're talking about?
Castle surgery.
Castle surgery, okay.
It's the only one that's available now.
Can I just...
I think there's a return here, yes, by all means.
Can I just say, obviously, if a specialist is needed, then of course there is not unlimited specialists. But a GP would be able to see you, I like to think, because every time when I call the doctors, within a week I get an appointment. I fell downstairs, I got an appointment within a day. Our GPs, our NHS is fantastic. They are underfunded, yes, but they are fantastic. They try to make the best, they try to give you the best solutions that they can possibly do. If you need to see a specialist, that is a different story. So I have to defend our GPs here.
Can I do the same?
Thank you very much. Chris.
I'm the Armed Forces Champion for Wiltshire Council, so I do speak with a little bit of knowledge on this, and also a veteran of 3 tours in Northern Ireland back in the 70s. And I would say that the Army rebasing programme has gone extremely well within our community. The local surgery, the Castle Practice, has taken on extra staff, extra doctors, extra nurses, extra rooms, and they had about 1,600 people sign up in August, mainly from the military community, and it went really smoothly. And there's no... I realise what the lady saying behind me, if you want to see a specific doctor, there can be a waiting time. But if you're willing to see a doctor, and they've also brought out a new triage system now, that there's dedicated doctors who will sit by the phone, you'll ring and speak to them directly, and they will give you the advice, and they'll make them out and see you later on. So, I'm sorry, but there aren't the issues locally, in a general sense, with us seeing the doctors and that. There is, I will go along with you, dental. And that's not just for the Army people, that is nationally across the piece. There are issues trying to see a national health dentist. But for Army rebasing and everything else, it's gone extremely well, and I must say that. And that's all credit to Wiltshire Council and to the DIO and who have built the quarters. They've had consultation right from word go with the local community, so there's been no issues whatsoever.
Thank you very much indeed. There's been a gentleman at the back being very patient with his arm in the air, so I'm going to turn to him now, please.
My name is Fred Galvin. I work for Combat Stress as a volunteer. The Labour candidate said there was it 9,000 people, soldiers? It is not. There is 16,500 veterans out there. 500 of those, near on 600, are living on the streets. If I don't know how many people are on Facebook, we've just lost a veteran up in Wakefield, and what I can't understand is where the government is not giving combat stress and the military personnel that are suffering from mental problems the help they need and stuff like that. We have to rely on funding of ourselves where we have to go out in public. What can you four candidates say to that, please?
So, thank you very much indeed. Perhaps I could turn to Danny in the first instance this time.
So I recognise, thank you, sir, and I recognise the importance of the work you do. And I'm not going to sit here and say that everything the government is doing is fine and the levels of funding are adequate. I'm sure that they're not, and I'm sure that we should be doing more. And you know, if I get to represent this area, one of my primary duties will be to stick up for the military community and veterans, because that is such an important part of the constituency. So I will work with you to ensure that. I would just make this point about government funding versus your own charity. Unless you think that you should be a public service, unless you think you should be employed by the government, and I think that Emma was implying that she doesn't think charities can do this sort of work, and she said why charities can't look after people properly.
No, I didn't say that.
Well, you said why people should be looked
Government
after properly rather than charities, implying that charities can't look after people properly.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, all right. Well, so what I understood was the suggestion that charities should not be doing this work, but the government should.
Yes.
Okay, right. So what is the role of Combat Stress and other charities? And let me try and answer that. I think that charities have an amazing ability to relate. They have the flexibility, they have the personal experience, they have all the additional resources of the expertise of the people who work in them, and the compassion and the going the extra mile and the additional funding that society can offer. Charity is an absolutely essential part, particularly for these really difficult, complicated questions. They should be in partnership with government. It's not either or. But the idea that there is no role for independent organisations in supporting our most vulnerable people is really dangerous, because then we're just saying, let's just say that, put the government in charge of everything. Actually, we all have a responsibility. And working through charities like yours, that is a really good way that society can fulfil its own obligations to its neighbours, as well as paying taxes and having public services.
Is it more about that there should be professionally trained people?
Well, I'm sure these are professional.
No, but the NHS has professionally trained nurses and doctors working.
Yes, it's not either or.
That's where
I completely agree. I mean, there is
the funding is lacking.
And there is too much of there, so we need. I'm not denying we need more funding. I totally agree. I do agree with that. I'm just sticking up for charities.
They should work in partnership.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Danny, thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to John over in the corner over there. John, thank you.
I'd just like to go back to the question I asked, right? And I'd just like to remind the panel that it's 50 years since the up banner started, not 40 years, so we'll be suffering for 50 years now, right? But the other thing is, and Emma, you mentioned about charities, right? Well, I'm sorry, but I think charities do a fantastic job, right?
I think they do too.
Let me talk, right? You've had your say. The thing being is, right, when you look at all the charities out there, some great charities, right? The Help for Heroes and the Royal British Legion, right? The way I look at it is this, right? When you look at all the fundraising those charities did, right? It brought the whole country together, right? When you see all the things that's going around Great Britain, raising money for Help for Heroes, right? Which I think is great, right? Okay, maybe the government could do more, whatever, but I think those charities, we should really applaud them, right, for the work they do, right? Because I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I think we should all applaud those charities. They do a fantastic job. I completely agree with you. It's just that when something is an essential public service, in my view, I think that the government should pay for that through the money that they have.
Might be our own line.
So I'm going to turn just for a sequence to Rachel, in fact. Yes, Rachel, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on that a little further. So, Combat Stress, Open Doors that I work with in Devizes, a homeless charity, Help for Heroes, all of these people are a vital part of British life. And most of us here, I expect, work in a charity of one sort or another or involved. My worry is that we have now chipped away at our fabric, at our public services, to the point that we're relying on charities in a way that is, I think, has gone too far. And I talk to volunteers who say they are exhausted, to charities who say they can't recruit enough volunteers. So I think the balance is just a little wrong. It's not binary, one or the other. It's we need a good public services that looks after people when they are in need. And charities play a role, always have done in Britain, always will.
Rachel, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to take one more follow-up question here before we move on. Sir, in the red jacket, please.
I understand what Emma was saying was that it's not that charities don't have a place. It's that we should be funding the charities through public money. Why is it that someone who is goes out and puts their life and mental health on the line is not funded and backed up when they come back and has to rely on shouldn't the charities be supplying the extra work, the extra stuff, rather than the essential stuff, which is the mental health support? Sorry, Martin.
I'm going to turn to Joe, I think, if that's all right, Joe.
Yeah. So, obviously, what's really happened is mental health seems to have been falling to charities. Why is it not an equal part of the NHS? Why is mental health seen as something different to physical health? There needs to be parity between mental health and physical health. And the Liberal Democrats are committed to making that happen by investing in the NHS and providing specialist mental health provisions as part, 24/7 in the National Health, at A&E and something like that, so that they can recognise when someone is having a crisis and needs that kind of assistance.
Thank you very much. I think obviously we do need to move on. I think there was one more final question that was coming from the back, I think. Thank you, Simon. We'll do this final question before we move topics.
Sorry, I agree that there should be some balance between government funding for charities, but there's charity work as well. I'm myself a service soldier, I've served in Afghanistan, and some of my friends with some of these mental issues don't want to approach people like the NHS or approach people like that, because to them it's a bit of a barrier. That, the charities who can offer a better ear to listen and guidance is more important for them than going to a government service where it's going to get recognised and people are going to look at them. You sit in a medical centre and I can probably point out 5 or 6 soldiers whom I know and then why they're there.
Thank you. I appreciate that obviously this is an area where the military is very important.
It's not charity related, it is the other part.
Yeah, so I'm going to move on because we do need to, but I will promise to come back to the topic if we get more time at the end, but I do want to make sure that we get a variety of topics covered this evening, so if you forgive me, we're going to move on. And next I'm going to turn to Rachel, who will answer the question, and I want to see whether Deborah Holmes is in the audience, please. Deborah, I've got your question on the topic that we do need to visit, of course, which is Brexit, and do you have that with you?
I do.
So Deborah, over to you, please.
I voted leave in the referendum. Over the last 3 years, I've come to the conclusion it doesn't matter whether we leave or we stay until we get a grip on the rampant greed that is running through our society. Nothing is going to change. And at present, over the last 20 years, you say we need migrant workers to fill in the key skills like nurses, doctors, plumbers, electricians, but you stop training our kids. You stop training our kids. When I left school, the kids that didn't have that academic behind them were our plumbers, they were our electricians, they were our mechanics, they were our builders. Like, these kids do not even meet that criteria anymore. You look at the apprenticeship websites, they are asking for A to C in English and Maths and 3 other GCSEs. My son was expelled in year 10. He had got educational needs, he is severely dyslexic, but he is very, very hands-on and he cannot get a job. He is now 19. He has been out of education since he was 14 years old. Like, all this has had a knock-on effect, and as I said, stay or leave, it doesn't matter. Until you lot get a grip on the rampant greed that is running through this country, kids like my son have no future.
The effect on education apprenticeships. Rachel, we're turning to you first, please.
So, Deborah, is it Debbie or Deborah? Debbie, yeah. Thank you for the question. It's such a core question. It gets to the heart of so much of what's important to us, I think. So, what Labour is saying is that we need to make radical change now. It isn't time for tinkering around, exactly because of what you're saying. We've got to fundamentally refund education. We've got to make vocational education just the same parity as academic, and that's not how it is at the moment. So you mentioned about your son and some of the issues he's come up against. Labour would take education to be the #1 priority. We would bring in a national education service that would be from the very beginning to the very end of education being free, so it's not a privilege, it's a right that all children would have equal, good quality education. SEND funding is lower than it should be and is underfunded in this county and across the nation, so that will be another big priority for Labour. I've probably come to the end of the time, I think, but if not, I'll just say that we also need to fund our NHS properly, and we need to make sure that all services are run in a strategic, long-term way, not short-term bits and pieces of very unstrategic, piecemeal, it seems to me, bits of funding. Labour's funding would be strategic, long-term, visionary. We're talking about, a really important investment. The country now is actually feeling, I feel, when I walk around a hospital or a school, I talk to teachers who are having to fund their own children's breakfasts
Rachel,
and pencils and books, and that's not right.
Thank you. Danny, can we turn to you?
Thanks for the question. Just try to take this point about greed. I agree with you that we have a culture in this country that treats people purely in terms of their economic value, and we put a price on young people and say how much are they worth and how much can they earn, and then we give some funding to them, and we give more to university because we think they're going to earn more and produce more for the national economy, rather than thinking of them as people who can make contributions, particularly in their communities and locally. So it was one of my problems with free movement of people. You mentioned Brexit. My problem with it, I believe in free trade. I believe in freedom of movement for goods, but people are not goods, and we shouldn't just be importing labour as if it's a fridge, the cheapest labour we can find, and bringing it here and putting it to work for us. People are people, and I don't think it's right that we just say wherever the cheapest people can, we should get them over here and put them to work for us, because what does that do for our own people? So the answer to that is partly about the immigration policy. We're going to close the borders to people who haven't got a job or haven't got money to invest or aren't scientists that we need. People can only come here if they have a job. That will incentivise businesses to train our own young people and put the pressure where it should be on our own workforce and on businesses to skill up young people. It also has a responsibility on government. So we are putting additional money into further education. We're creating a new network of further education colleges called Institutes of Technology, which will train young people in the skills they need for the new economy. And we're going to ensure that there's a much stronger network locally of FE. So we are committed to an absolutely generational priority to make sure that young people, particularly in rural areas, don't have to feel that they have to go far away for some high-paid job that will never bring them back again, and that they can stay in their area and get a decent job that can make a wage and put money on the table and feed their family, like that young ex-soldier I was talking about. I totally echo your
Danny,
concern.
thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Let's move into Emma, can we? Thank you, Emma.
Well, we would get rid of the tuition fees, and we'd bring back things like bursaries for nurses, more people can study, and it's not money wouldn't be something that would stop people being able to study. The other thing which I'd like to see more of is the way that the government spends a huge amount of money, and I would like to see some government contracts actually specifying that the firms should behave in certain ways, such as having apprenticeships, and also, of course, for me, environmental standards are very, very important. So I would like to see this written into government contracts, so to make sure that it's not just getting whatever it is at the lowest price, but also make sure that the local firms do the right thing for the community.
Thank you very much, Emma. And on this topic, Jo then, please. Thank you.
Hi, I think I had two issues there as well, that you were talking about your son was expelled in year 10 and he has severe dyslexia. So basically it sounds to me that he has not received the support through special educational support that he needs. And that's because it's critically underfunded at the moment. And the schools are so focused on exam results and league tables that they're quietly off-rolling those children who they don't think are going to get the grades that they want from them. So we need to change the system. We need to change how schools are assessed. We need to get rid of Ofsted, which is maybe too narrow and too academically focused, and it needs to look at a wider suite of care of the children, and including social and emotional well-being of the staff as well as the pupils. I think we also need to expand the apprentice system so that it gives people a wider choice of what they can move into. I had a third point and it's just gone out of my head, but in that case I'll leave it at that, just in case we'll run out of time.
Joe, thank you very much. So in the interest of fairness, and just let the candidates know, we're going to turn back to Joe to any follow-up questions from the audience or reflections that anybody wants to make. Anything from the audience while we're on this particular topic? There's a hand being raised at the back.
Right, it's all vaguely saying you're going to do all this. The issue is you have now got kids that are 19 years old and older that the education system has failed. They haven't just failed by a little bit, they have failed by a lot. And these are the very same kids, right, that are getting into trouble with drugs. They are doing drugs. I was speaking to my son about this earlier. Right, a lot of them are doing cocaine, they're doing heroin, they're doing marijuana because they feel like they have got no future. That future has been taken from them. Right, so you're saying you're going to do this, X, Y, and Z, if the future kids that are in school now, but what are you going to do about the kids that have already left education? You know, because like I said, they're 18, 19, 20, in their 20s now, right, and many of them have never had a job because they don't have English and maths. And they're being told, my son was made to feel stupid at school, right? The headmaster in a meeting turned around and said he had no future and he wouldn't be surprised if he ended up in prison, right? I've had to have my son referred to camps because he was on suicide watch, right? What are you going to do to help those children that have already left school?
Deborah, thank you. So, Joe,
my heart goes out to you. I'm dyslexic. I actually don't make a big deal out of it because I have mechanisms for trying to get around these things, but I have my own issues. So I'd like to think that maybe your son one day, if he chooses, would like to be sitting up here in future. So I encourage you to encourage him as much as you can. The Liberal Democrats, we appreciate that once you leave school, that is not when education ends. Education and learning is lifelong, which is why we've brought out I don't really like the name very much, so apologies for it, the Skills Wallet, which basically is a fund that would be given to you to access at certain different points in your lifetime. So at 25, there is a budget of £4,000 for additional training, and then it's at 40, and then at 55. So at 40 and 55, you get £3,000 budget to spend on whatever training that you need. And your employer and yourself, you can add money into this fund if you need additional things. So the Liberal Democrats realise that people are coming out of education right now without the tools that they need to survive in this really harsh country that we find ourselves in now. And the Skills Wallet is one of our solutions for that.
Joe, thank you very much indeed. I think we have a question from George over there in the corner, and we're coming to Rachel next for a response. George, thank you.
Thank you. As somebody who went through the education system 50 plus years ago and actually left with no qualifications, I never failed to get myself a job because I worked at it and I went there. If I left school, I was told that I had two choices. I could go down the mines, as living in a mining community, or get out in the fields and work. Now, we've taken those options away. The education system is not fit for purpose in any way, shape or form, and hasn't been since its inception. We actually just cover the middle ground. We don't treat people who have special needs, and like myself, who is educationally quite bright. We don't look at those people, and we just look at, and it's all about qualifications. Qualifications is not the be-all and end-all of what you go to school for. They are supposed to be preparing you for future life, and they don't.
George, thank you. And Rachel, just before you respond, just in fairness to the audience, to make sure we're not getting too much arm ache, I'm going to, after Rachel's responded to George, I'm then going to the back, to the lady at the back, and then coming back to you at the front for a further comment, and then we're going to move on. So can I ask Rachel, please, what George said? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, George. So, as you say, it isn't working. Education, I agree with you. I think it's a broken system at the moment. If we just take SEND, I'll just share one thing that I spotted recently. So 14.9% of all pupils have special education needs. So that's a good proportion of pupils. It's not just a very small number. And the recent Select Committee report that I read, it came up a question at a recent Hustings, it really is very damning about the way SEND is handled in our education system. But coming to your broader question, we need to completely rethink the way education happens in the country, it seems to me. And Labour will take this extremely seriously in terms of developing new green apprenticeships. So this will mean a whole series of good green jobs that will be available to people that are not perhaps, you know, the academic type, but may well be into their carpentry or their plumbing and so on. And there will be an enormous number, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of new jobs that will be created as a big investment in the country, partly to replace some of the jobs that have been lost. So, for example, just locally, we have at Swindon the Honda closures, which are going to be a huge impact on Swindon. So Labour has decided that one of the gigafactories, as they're being called, will be sited in Swindon. So that's down the road from us. And it's that sort of thinking that we need. New green jobs and a totally different approach to vocational education and how that works.
Rachel, thank you very much. I'm going to the lady at the back for Danny, please.
Hi, I know my question has sort of been touched on in different ways. I know education is, of course, a high priority, but for those of us that have made it through the maze that is education and have been struggling to keep jobs due to mental health or whatever else is going on, what is being done for those people?
Danny, thank you.
So let me quickly just cover this question about qualifications, because I think it leads on, which is, yes, qualifications are not be all and end all, but they are a lot. And actually, it is necessary to support young people to gain qualifications which are recognised by employers. And the good news is that over the last 10 years, education standards have risen significantly in the state sector. They simply have. And we've been rising up the international league tables. We used to be really low, we're now rising. We have state schools which are challenging private schools in terms of their standards. Yes, there are huge problems. We have problems in this constituency, problems across the country, particularly problems with SEN. But actually overall, state education in this country is getting better. And that is a good thing, because that means hundreds of thousands of young people have a better life chance than they did under the previous system. And in terms of what it leads to, I echo the point about education being a lifelong thing. And now actually all the parties have roughly the same policy in this area, which is to give an amount of money to adults to use for retraining. So if you leave work for whatever reason, it might because your industry goes out of business. You know, we have a very fast changing economy. People are not going to work in the same sort of work for the whole of their lives. There's going to be huge changes. So what we are going to need is a budget, personal budget of money that people can use to retrain as they go. That should be topped up by employers as well. So the answer to your question is, whatever government, I think, but I'll certainly will support people to retrain as they need to, and if it involves different sort of interpersonal skills, therapeutic support, that can be used too. But the job has got to be to give people the support that they need so that they can navigate this very, very complicated jobs market that we're all going to be in for the future.
Danny, thank you very much. I appreciate Simon is kneeling here, but just to ensure consistency from the chair, I did offer the next question to this lady in the front in the yellows. I don't know whether we could just take the microphone. Sorry, Simon, I know that you were kneeling down there, but I did promise.
Okay, so it's kind of follow up from so that did speak about him getting educated 50 years ago. Now, okay. I grew up in a children's home. I lived as one of the poorest of the poor, basically. No one cared. At 15, I got told the best you can hope for is becoming a hairdresser. I didn't care for that. I took my parents to court, they had to pay for boarding school for me, and I got my education. Now I'm a mature student, I'm working full time, also going to university, and I recently spoke to a social worker. Back then, bear in mind, I didn't have any support, yeah? I spoke to that social worker, and the social worker who swapped between voting Lib Dems and Labour all her life. She said in the last few years, the biggest change that she has seen is the way children are treated, the way they can be treated, and the way they can be helped, education-wise, life-wise, and that was in the last 5-6 years. That was under a Conservative government. The standard has raised massively. They now have proper events for the children in the care system, where kids get awarded or get awards for achievements, for qualifications that they achieve. They can actually pursue their career wishes, their career dreams. And she said in the last 5 years, she's not once heard of anyone being told what they can and can't do when it comes to career choice. If you want to become a police officer, it doesn't matter that your poor child that grew up in the children's home. I was told exactly that back then. I couldn't be anything else. Now I'm standing here, and I was under Conservative government, that I would have been able to follow my dreams straight away, rather than now having to do it at a late age, at almost 30.
And can I, on behalf of the audience, congratulate you on what you've achieved. And in the interest of fairness, to remain consistent, I'd like to give Emma the opportunity to make any response, please.
That's fantastic that we're getting something done better. I can remember reading reports sort of 15 years ago saying that children who've grown up away from their families in Germany are just as likely to get to university as children that are in families. And we were then way back, and if we're catching up, then that's obviously...
People that I grew up in Germany in my early years, the people that I grew up with in that children's home, 95% of them are currently or have been in jail. So the university degree would have been a luxury if I would have stayed in Germany at that point.
Okay, well that's what I read in the statistics, but yeah, anyhow, that's that's great. That's fantastic. Yeah, I don't think I've got. I mean, yeah. If we're doing social work better than we used to, then that's obviously fantastic. And I think that I have heard again that people saying that social workers saying that they haven't got the time that they like to spend with some people, and you know, this comes back to funding, and you know, perhaps they could do even better with more funding. I don't know.
Emma, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your questions on that particular topic. I did say that after those four, in the interest of fairness, we're going to move topics, because I do want to make sure, because it's already 8:15, time is certainly flying while we're having fun. So, I'm moving now on to the topic of poverty, and once again, in terms of sequence, I'm turning to Emma to respond in the first instance, before then moving on to Joe. The question is from Alf Game. Is Alf in the audience? No? Okay. So I'm going to ask Alf's question on his behalf. Poverty in the UK, and in particular the proportion of working people who are in poverty, has risen sharply in the last 5 years. The Social Metrics Commission has recently estimated a total of 14.3 million adults and children in poverty, nearly half of whom have been so far in there for 3 or more years, And the Joseph Rowntree Foundation reckons that at least 4.1 million of the adults in poverty are in work. One local consequence of this is the opening of a food bank, the opening of a food bank in supposedly prosperous Marlborough. How do you propose that this problem can be addressed? Emma, we're turning to you, please.
I think that, what we've seen is that wages haven't gone up over about the last 20 years. So that, for people are forced to take a job, which you can argue is the right thing to do, but they're not, the pay that they're being offered isn't enough for them to live. So we need to improve the wages, which clearly is very, very important. And I think the other thing to point out about people living in severe financial stress is that it's very, very difficult to make good life decisions when you're under a huge amount of stress. So that, it's sort of proven that it's nothing to do with your innate intelligence or not whether you take a good life decision. If you're under stress, you have the wrong chemicals in your brain and you can't do it, so you take bad decisions. So we do really need to help people. So we are proposing that everybody should get a universal income of £89 a week, which is will be paid across the board. If people need housing benefit, then that can be paid to them too. If people need any disability benefit, that can be paid to them too. But everybody would get £89 a week, and pensioners, of course, get more. I haven't got the figure in front of me. So this would also be to help this problem. And of course, then people who are earning a lot more would then be taxed higher, and so that we get money back that way.
Emma, thank you very much. We are turning on this question to Jo now, please. Thank you, Jo.
So, yes, something going back to my opening speech is that, yes, the social contract is broken. Something is desperately wrong when people in full-time education are needing to go to food banks. When our nurses have to go to food banks in order to feed children, it is broken. What are we going to do about that? Well, we're going to first of all, I guess, invest in education, in social services, and in our infrastructure. So we're proposing to borrow money at this time, whilst the interest rate is low. I think it's 130 billion. I've got the hustings here in front of me somewhere. That would at a start provide some jobs and things like that. What was the other point? Since the dyslexia kicking in under stress, I can't remember my words. And also, yes, the living wage. So we would like to also undertake some research into what is a fair and justifiable payable living wage, and then how we could implement that across in the public service, but also to encourage businesses to pay that as well.
Jo, thank you very much. Moving then, please, to Rachel.
So, arguably we live in a relatively affluent constituency here, but we know that there are real pockets of deprivation. So there are parts of our community that are in the top 30% of deprived communities in the country. So that's compared to Glasgow and inner London. So just think about that. That's really important, and it's a fact. So as you were saying, or rather as Alf was saying, what are we going to do about it? This is in-work poverty we're talking about. Food banks that we see every day in all of our towns. There was an article in the Gazette and Herald that talked about a 44% rise in the use of food banks just in this last year in Devizes. So Labour would bring in a living wage of £10 per hour for all from the age of 16. So that's one thing we would do. We would make sure that zero-hour contracts are banned. They are an iniquitous way of working. They give stress, as Emma said, that sort of stress of not knowing when the next work is coming from. It is an iniquitous way of working, and we need to completely rethink the way the economy works for people. At the moment, it seems to me that people serve the economy, and I think we need to reverse that and develop an economy that looks after and serves people, so the other way around.
Rachel, thank you very much. Danny, please.
So Emma was right in pointing out that wages haven't grown in 20 years. That is the fundamental fact, and it's a fact across the developed world. This is a feature of globalisation. Developed countries everywhere have suffered a stagnation in wage growth. Developing nations have experienced huge wage growth. So globalisation globally has been a great thing for the poor of the world, the great bulk of the world's population. The victims of it have been ordinary working people in the West. The wealthy in the West have done perfectly well, of course. Ordinary working people have not. So you can just, that is the problem, and we see it everywhere, and our crazy politics across the West is the result of it. So what do we do about this problem? There are no easy solutions, and I'm afraid just higher taxes and huge transfers of wealth aren't going to do it. We need a combination of long-term policies to invest in our people, to put the skills under young people and adults to ensure that they can prosper in the modern economy. We need investment in technology and in infrastructure to ensure that our whole country prospers in the future, not just the southeast, as I was saying. And we need a culture that rewards ordinary work. Manufacturing, care, it's not all about finance jobs, and vital as the finance sector is to our economy too. And we need to respect the sort of work that people do that we've been discussing here, that are about helping their neighbours. We need to make sure that is properly supported. So there's no simple answer, I'm afraid, but this is not a feature of sort of evil Tories that have sort of harmed the working people. This is what happens in huge technological change that's gone on since in the last generation. And it's going to take a long time to address it, but we need to do it in a whole combination of ways. I'm happy to argue about universal credit. It's been a great success for 95% of the people who use it. All the terrible stories you hear about, all the jobs are a tiny minority, and there is a real problem because universal credit works like a job. You get paid monthly, like you're in a job. But for a small number of people, it really isn't working. It's very, very tough. And actually, we need stronger communities.
Do you believe your own advertising? The Advertising Standards Authority has banned one of the Department of Work and Pensions things that they published. Brought by the Conservative government.
Okay, yeah. So we've had the question and we've had the response. Right, just in terms of interest of fairness to the audience, I've seen a couple of hands, but I just want to make sure I've given the opportunity for people to be heard that hasn't spoken yet. So therefore, for fullest follow-up question, and Danny, I'm coming back to you, I'm going to Donna at the back, please.
Right,
We're not there.
I'll just be really loud. I'm a military wife. I'd like to say thank you to the community for all your support. Oh, hello. I'm also a presenter at Castledown FM. But I would like to talk on behalf of the people that live here that aren't military. What about social housing? That comes under the poverty side of it, doesn't it? Because they can't afford the houses around here. It's London prices. It's Wiltshire wages. Can't afford it. That's where the poverty lies as well. You know, you're having to pay rent to put a roof over your head. You can't afford to feed your children. You can't go to the food bank because you earn too much money. So I would like to know what the party's going to do about social housing. There has been 6 social houses built in Wiltshire in the last year. That's down from 504 in 2010. I don't know if this is correct because I've been online, I've done my research. And that's only 1,000 built nationally. People can't afford mortgages. They can't afford it. You've got 2 people working just to put food on the table and keep a roof over your head. You can't see your children. They're at school all day. You're working till 7 o'clock at night, having to put your kids in at childcare at 8 o'clock. You don't get help with childcare because you earn too much money. I would like to know what people are going to do about the cost of social housing.
Thank you. Danny responds, just acknowledge I have seen you, George, so you can just rest your arm for now. I'm going to just turn to Danny in response to that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hugely important topic there and lots in it. On social housing. In terms of council housing, this council is actually building council houses. It's building thousands of council houses. Well, I will let the councillor can probably answer that question. Shall I? I mean,
you're all right.
Okay. So there is a council house building programme going on. That's in terms of that topic. More generally, though, you are completely right. There is not enough housing in our country, and there's not enough housing in this community. I mean, there's 4,000 new homes being built for the soldiers coming home, which is obviously vital. But more broadly, we need more homes, and it is a very, very complicated challenge to get more houses built, especially in peaceful areas where there naturally have to be protections against for the environment. So, this government has now a record house building, numbers of houses being built. 250,000 new houses are being built every year. It's the highest rate for 40 years. It's still not enough. We need to be getting to 300,000, but we are on track to reach that. Wait a second. No, I'm talking about the overall supply of housing, which is the fundamental question. But how do we get more houses into the economy so that prices come down? You raise a good point about mortgages as well. Years ago, mortgages were, the deposit was affordable. Now it's not. People do often have are able to pay the mortgage. They're paying rent, so they can pay the mortgage. What they can't do is afford the deposit. We used to have a system where you borrowed 95% of the value of your house. No longer. You have to find £30,000 for a deposit. Absolutely impossible. So we have, in our manifesto, are committing to a new mortgage system, and we are going to be ensuring that the industry provides mortgages that people can afford again. So, yes to more council housing, yes to increasing house building, and that's a very complicated matter, but it's underway, we're improving it, and yes to cheaper mortgages.
Just in the interest of fairness, I have seen you, George. Is there another question from somebody that hasn't gone yet that would like to put their question before I... Say again?
Can we answer that as well?
What was that, sorry?
We want to
housing. They want to talk about housing.
Yeah, so the opening question from the opening question from the audience member that submitted it previously, I'm making sure that everybody's had the opportunity to respond, and then follow-up questions I'm letting you then answer if you haven't already in previous ones, just to make sure we get through enough and we also get time. So I can't do that on every question, but I am attempting to be consistent. Can I come to this lady in the... Oh, sorry, yes sir, I'll come to you please.
Yeah, does it have to be about housing? Or any question?
We're on the subject of poverty, so poverty, housing. If you've got a question on there, we're happy to take that.
No, it's about businesses.
Okay, I'll come back to you.
Anyone with poverty?
That lady, I think, in the green over there. Thank you, Simon.
I take issue with the idea that universal credit works for people. It doesn't work for anyone. Universal credit takes into account housing benefit, council tax, what used to be income support, and people overall get less money. They're expected from their benefit that they get to pay something, a small percentage, towards their council tax. They're expected to pay something towards their rent. They don't get the full cost of their rent. I rent a small house that I used to live in. My tenant lost his job in February last year. He ended up on universal credit, and he is now only able to pay the rent every other month. Now, I used to be a social worker. I don't want to be the agent of putting somebody out on the streets, so I'm unwilling to pursue him for the rent when I know he can't actually pay it. Universal credit does not work. It's the majority of people who end up on universal credit are pushed further into poverty than they were before.
Emma, can I give you an opportunity to respond?
I totally agree. Everything that I've heard about universal credit. I had somebody contact me yesterday saying that, also the assessment. She's also has a disability problem, and the assessment system as well that goes with the invalidity payments. The sort of idea of outsourcing this to a firm that does sort of check boxes means that people, they fall through the net, and people who are unable to look after themselves are not getting enough, this is really it's terrible. In a civilized country we should be able to look after people.
Emma, thank you. Right, so we're going to move on. I've got two more to follow. I've got George, and then we're going to go to the lady that's right in front of me in the blue before I then move on to topics, as I did mention George earlier. So, George, can I have your response, please? And then we're turning to Joe for this. Thank you, George.
As a full-time carer for my wife, I find it really obnoxious that I have to have a certain amount that I'm allowed to live on. The government says that there's a certain amount of money that I have to live on. They state that, and that puts me into poverty. I get paid £66 and 15 pence a week to look after my wife. That saves the government and the country hundreds of thousands of pounds. Saves the government hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. Why do I have the burden of looking after my wife, and the government sets, I think it's £224 a week is what we have to live on. That puts us into poverty. I climbed out of poverty. I was born into poverty as a kid, and I worked my way out. And due to circumstances beyond my control, I'm now back there. How does any of you there, believe that you can make life better for the people in this country when you set such a low figure for people to be the same with universal credit. Universal credit is set so low because it is set there to make people go out and find jobs. It's not there for the life of luxury, it's there to make people go out to work and find jobs. Unfortunately, I don't have that luxury. I have to look after my wife because she's not capable of doing that herself. And I find it hard to get through on what I get each week.
George, thank you. We are going to Joe, just to make sure I'm being fair. Joe, coming to you first, please.
I was reading something recently that just how much the unpaid carers are actually really supporting our economy because the government isn't paying you to do the job that you're doing, and it's a full-time job. I must admit I don't know too much about carers allowance, but I'm going to go back to the question earlier about housing, which was over on the other side, and that is that the Liberal Democrats are proposing to build 100,000 new council houses a year, social housing a year, because we don't have enough houses, and until we have the better housing stock, then those house prices aren't going to come down, those rental prices aren't going to come down. And also we'd like to, I'm aware that people are in rented accommodation, that they are in a secure position because the landlord can always just evict you under a no-fault eviction, so that is also something that we would like to address to stop those from happening.
Joe, thank you very much. We are now coming to Rachel, and this lady here, please, in blue. Thank you.
I'd like to make two very quick points. I don't know whether anyone else is 66 years old like me and remembers the Thatcher years, but universal credit is actually a complete reversal of what Margaret Thatcher did when she changed things so that local councils had to pay housing benefit. That was a disaster. This is another disaster, and the Tories keep saying it's their beautiful project, but they keep forgetting that Margaret Thatcher was their goddess, and then reversing that. The second point I'd like to make is I'm fed up with people being called benefit scroungers. I'm a pensioner, so I can't be called that anymore. But people aren't benefit scroungers. The real benefit scroungers in this country are the companies that pay such low wages that taxpayers' money has to subsidise those wages. They're the benefit scroungers.
Rachel's opportunity to respond, and as is a comment, I think you get the opportunity to say what you wanted to say earlier, Rachel, so it's over to you.
I'll do my best. Yeah, so thank you for that last question and the couple before. Labour would actually abolish universal credit. There was discussion about tinkering with it, but the research we've done shows that it just simply isn't working, so we would abolish it. We also would want to change the punishing way that universal credit is administered. People are made to feel like they are, as you say, benefit scroungers. And that whole attitude, somebody talked earlier about the attitude of greed in society. I think this is another big problem, the attitude that somehow some people are scroungers and are not, worth sort of being respectful to. I just also want to say that Labour would make sure that all care is paid for elderly people. So this is already the case in Scotland. It's nothing radical, actually. It's saying that we need a national care service like we need a national health service. So people who, like yourself, George, are frankly, I think it is disgraceful that we've got to a point in this country where people like you are feeling, I imagine, quite isolated because you're at home looking after your wife, and I'm really sorry to hear some of the stories tonight. I think it shows just how bad things have got, and it needs a radical rethink where your work would be recognised, but also you'd get more help. You'd get more help to support your wife. My own parents also are going through this, and we as a family have had to do a whip round. I'm lucky, I'm a fairly privileged woman, I'm aware of that, I'm aware of my privilege, but I absolutely can empathise with anyone going through this. And in my family, we've had to whip round in order to fund my father's care.
Thank you very much. So, having done the 4 follow-ups from the set question, we're now going to switch topics once again, and Rachel, it's your opportunity to respond first, followed by Danny, Emma and Joe, and if I get my papers in order, we're now switching to climate change, and is Teresa Thornton in the room, please? Teresa Thornton. Do you have your question with you, Teresa?
I do.
Excellent. We'll get the microphone over to you. Thank you.
The first declaration of a climate emergency was made by the City of Darebin in Melbourne, Australia on the 5th of December 2016. The UK government declared an environmental and climate emergency on the 1st of May this year. Given that the World Meteorological Organization published a report yesterday stating there's been an increase of 43% in the warming effect on the climate of long-lived greenhouse gases since 1990. If elected, what measures during your first 5-year term would your government implement to combat climate change and redress its environmental impact?
Thank you. And literally just a bit of housekeeping on timekeeping. Rachel will respond. I'll give the opportunity for all the candidates to respond. I doubt we're going to have time for follow-up questions from the audience in the basis that we have to then allow the candidates to have their closing statement as well. But we'd like to turn to Rachel in relation to the question from Teresa. Thank you.
So, Teresa, absolutely agree with what you're saying. It is an emergency. This is not a time for tinkering around. Labour would commit to a 250 billion over 10 years to address the climate emergency. It's absolutely at the heart and threaded through all aspects of our manifesto. We've taken very seriously the children that led the way. They've provided the leadership, haven't they? Not politicians on this. So we're taking that extremely seriously. Labour in May, as you say, it's many years after the Australians, but Labour called the climate emergency back in May, and we will absolutely lead the way on this. And I think, to be honest, we're the only party that has the vision and the boldness and the real will to make this happen.
Thank you very much indeed. So we're now moving to Danny, please.
Okay. I don't like the word emergency. I don't think we should be using. We should. It's an emergency. Okay. Thank you. So I don't. I disagree with you. I don't use the word emergency.
In Wiltshire, isn't it?
So, what we need to do is to take it extremely seriously and to work seriously and soberly towards it. We must not run around panicking, and we must not conjure up this vision of Armageddon that is coming towards us. We must soberly and maturely invest in the new technologies that are going to transform our economy, just as technologies have always transformed our economy, and help deliver the carbon neutral future that we need. And it mentioned Wiltshire Council. Wiltshire Council is committing to carbon neutral operations within 10 years, but that can be done by a single council. It can't be done by an economy as a whole. The proposal made by the Green Party, and I think Labour, is effectively to crash our economy in order to deliver this dream. They are proposing to totally turn around the entire basis on which our economy works, which is sadly way too carbon heavy, within a decade. The effect of that will be absolutely catastrophic. The IPCC has said that it's necessary to turn around to get to carbon neutral by 2050, and that is what we can do. That is achievable, and it is sensible, and we are going to do it. So that is what's going to happen.
Danny, just pause you there for a moment.
Sure.
Danny's been interrupted just a couple of times, and just in the interest of all candidates, we need to just make sure that Danny's words are heard, please, before we finish this time.
It's totally fine to shout out a little bit. I mean, I totally accept how passionate people feel about this. I just disagree with you. I think we need to. The answer to climate change, as the answer to all great challenges, is human ingenuity, and the innovation that is going to deliver the carbon neutral future we need is going to be delivered by a capitalist economy, where people are investing in the new businesses that are going to deliver the change we need. It is not going to happen by taxing the country and putting huge power into the hands of the state to somehow come up with some future that it can decide. We cannot predict how we're going to get out of the climate crisis we're in, except there's a crisis. But it's only going to happen by human ingenuity and free markets, and government needs to get behind that.
Thank you very much, Dan. Can we move to Emma, please? Thank you.
Business as usual is not working. I mean, we've known about this for the last 30 years. You know, what's happening is the greenhouse gases are getting more and more and more. So it is an emergency. We are running out of time. As I said in my opening speech, the UN is telling us that the window of opportunity is closing. You know, it is really, really serious. So we believe, as you said, that we do need to turn our economy completely around in the next 10 years, and that is absolutely a necessity. Caroline Lucas from the Green Party first proposed the Green New Deal in 2008. That was then picked up in America recently, which is great, and now it's been picked up by the Labour Party as well, which is great. I hope that it'll work its way over and perhaps get to Danny's party as well. We absolutely do need to do this. We are proposing to spend, 100 billion a year, which is, in line with Philip Hammond's calculations of what's needed to be done. It will make fantastic opportunities. We need to train up hundreds of people to be able to, install heat pumps and turbines, and so that all of this is going to be really, really good for people and the economy. Actually, it's not going to crash the economy. It's going to do the precise opposite. It's going to get everybody working, doing purposeful jobs. So
I'm really sorry, but can I interrupt there?
You can't actually. We do need to continue to be fair to the candidates. No. So I'm afraid the answer is you can't interrupt. We're going to continue. Thank you. Are you done, Emma? Thank you. Okay. Appreciate there's lots of hands floating in the air, but obviously we only have just now under 20 minutes left before the published end time, and of course we all have homes to go to. It's great to see that you're so engaged. Thank you for your engagement. We just need to make sure that we finish with our final response to this question, and then give the candidates the opportunity for closing statements before we bring the event to a close. So I'm not ignoring you, but we just need to make sure that we do stay on time. Thank you very much. So, Joe, we're going to turn to you. Thank you.
So the Liberal Democrats have quite a series of different proposals that we're going to put in place if we are elected as a majority government. But I guess locally I'd like to also mention about the Wiltshire Council declaring a climate emergency. My husband is a climate activist, and I introduced him to the Wiltshire Liberal Democrat councillors, and he helped them put that proposal together, which was passed much to everyone's amazement. And that was also Extinction Rebellion were also involved in that. But as well, with the climate emergency, it's going to be the poorest people who are going to be most affected, the poorest countries. So climate change is in every part of our life, that we have got to change that. So how are we going to do it? So have you noticed how we have an awful lot of windy hilltops? But no wind farms. Why is that? Well, that is due to planning restrictions put in place by the Conservatives. So let's get rid of that. Let's start having some of these wind farms here in Wiltshire. We're quite lucky. We have a lot of solar farms. So actually, on the whole, in Wiltshire, our electricity generation is not too bad. But we would like to see 80% of all electricity being generated by renewable sources by 2030. As I said before, we need to act now. We have the technology. We know how to do it. It's just the politicians, the government has been unwilling to do it. And we need to get started. So we need to ban fracking. Why on earth are we looking for more hydrocarbons? We can't even burn the hydrocarbons we've already found without going over that 1.5 degrees centigrade raise. So why are we looking for more? We need to, whilst we are still, obviously we're not going to switch to carbon zero overnight, we have got to be doing other things that will take carbon out of the atmosphere.
Thank you very much indeed.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So, thank you very much. And just to warn Jo that I'm coming back to her because closing statements will be done in reverse alphabetical order. At the start, you may remember that we did it in alphabetical order, so the candidates will now have the opportunity to make a closing statement of no more than 3 minutes. So closing statements of 3 minutes, and of course representing the Liberal Democrats, Jo Waltham, please.
Well, I have something prepared, but it's rather short, so I just want to actually want to thank you, each and every one of you, to bring forward your an insight into your lives, and I've certainly learnt a lot this evening, and I have the utmost respect for everyone who has shared what they have gone through. I kind of feel there's one thing that we've not really talked about tonight, although it does kind of affect everything, and that's apart from climate change, and that is Brexit. The only kind of Brexit that's currently on offer now is the ultra-hard Brexit demanded by what is left of the Conservative Party. I think it's time that we should think again. Now that we can see that Brexit is the worst deal in history and is likely to lead to the breakup of the United Kingdom, which is something that we would not like to see. We need to fix our broken political system. I think part of the issue we face right now is that everyone feels so angry and frustrated and unheard that their vote does not matter. So we need to fix our political system, and I know proportional representation is boring and it will lead to more coalitions, but I think we have reached a critical point where we have to change our system. We have to have every vote matter. We also need to protect our planet, which is the only one we've got, and build a society that cares about all of its citizens. So I beg you, please vote Liberal Democrats in this general election.
Jo, thank you very much. And her closing statement representing the Labour Party then, Rachel Schneider-Ross.
So it seems to me that we really do face a choice now. What kind of country do we want to be? What kind of politics do we want? We've heard tonight some really heartwarming and worrying stories actually about the impact of the last 10 years of austerity. So do we want to continue with the status quo? Do we want to continue with a Tory-led government, a piecemeal approach to investment, no real vision, it seems to me, from political leaders, and low investment really, relatively, in their manifesto? We've got an economy now that is a 10-year low. We've got one of the lowest productivity growths in Europe. Corporate leaders may make a profit, but they don't invest back into their businesses. And water, energy and rail rip off the consumers, where rough sleeping and food banks, as we were saying earlier, are part of our everyday life, and where, believe it or not, life expectancy is now going down. So the Tories want to deregulate our economy further. They want to sell off parts of the NHS, and they want to crash out Brexit, which will decimate our businesses, will decimate the most vulnerable and our environment. So as a local woman, campaigning and having lived experience of working in the community, I would love to achieve so much more for Tidworth and for our country. And what Labour is offering is a fully costed manifesto, which I would just commend you to read. It's really not that radical. But as you read it through, you agree. I agree with pretty much everything. Rail nationalisation is extremely popular with the public. So what will Labour do in terms of supporting people here in Tidworth? We'll review the way that military accommodation is run, specifically the future accommodation model. We'll nationwide build 100,000 truly affordable new homes each year. Our green industrial revolution will help rethink our town's infrastructure, and we will invest in schools and youth services here in Tidworth and in the area. We'll rebalance the focus on outsourcing and think again, and it's not binary this, but we need to stop the creeping privatisation, and we need to achieve true value for defence, not wasting money on failures such as the awful Capita recruitment project. We must make sure that that never happens again. So it's time for real change. Labour's bold vision is for real change. We want to invest in our country, and we're doing this for the nurses, for the cafe owners, for the soldiers, for the shopkeepers, for the cleaners, for our elderly and for our students. Only Labour has the will and the vision to launch a green industrial revolution.
And for the Conservatives, Danny Kruger, please. Sorry.
Thank you. So it's been a very interesting discussion, really loads of very important points raised about some really vital questions of policy. I think there's a broader question which we should just address at the end, which is ultimately the really important question of this election, which is how do we unite our country? Our whole country is terribly divided. It has been divided by the really difficult times that we've been going through politically in the last few years. There are two ways to unite our country, and that really is the choice at this election. The first option is to go back, to undo the referendum that was held 3 years ago, to cancel the decision that the country made at that point, to cancel the commitments that the parties made in the 2017 election as well, to fulfil the decision of the people in the referendum, and to have years more discussion, deliberation, debate, more referendums on Brexit. I ask you to consider what that would do to the unity of our country, what it would feel like to the millions of people who voted to leave, what it would do to our social fabric and to our sense of trust in politics if we just decide we're not going to do that anymore because it got too difficult and because Theresa May made a mess of it. We're just going to go back and tell people, sorry, you were wrong. We're not going to leave the EU after all. What that would do to our country. There is another way of uniting our nation, which is to fulfil the mandate of the people, to get Brexit delivered, to push it through Parliament, which will happen within weeks of a Conservative majority being returned to the House of Commons, and finally enable us to focus on all the important questions that we've been talking about this evening. That is the mission, that is what needs to be done, and the alternative is between two leaders. One leader who is, for all his eccentricity and colourfulness, a centrist. If you look at Boris Johnson's record as Mayor of London, if you look at actually what he's saying and doing now as Prime Minister on the domestic agenda, investing in public services, supporting infrastructure across the country, trying to ensure that young people everywhere have the opportunities they need. That is the agenda of this one nation Conservative government. It is also committed to delivering on the mandate of the people. Those are respectable, decent, frankly conservative things to do that is in keeping with the traditions of this country. And the alternative, I'm afraid, and I've actually got to know Rachel a bit in these debates, she's a lovely lady. I agree with so much of what she's saying, except when she just said she supports everything in that manifesto. She is proposing to support a leader, potential Prime Minister, who is proposing the most radical Marxist agenda that we've had in any of our lifetimes. It is. I mean, it quite simply is. It's the most hard left manifesto in our lifetimes, more so than Michael Foot.
And Danny, thank you very much. And finally, from the Green Party, Emma Dorney, thank you.
Well, whichever of us becomes MP will almost certainly be told at one stage or another that there isn't enough money to do what we think is right, whether it be for our public services like the NHS or to tackle the climate emergency. But with my understanding of economics, I believe that I am actually the best candidate to argue back and really get us what we need and get the economy working in a way that works for everybody. I want to say sort of a quick thing, I'm totally in support of proportional representation. We haven't got it, unfortunately. So I know that many people are thinking about voting tactically. So what I'd like people to do, if they're thinking about voting tactically, check the actual polling data, preferably for this constituency. They'll probably come out before the election. And be very careful you don't waste your vote by voting tactically when it won't make any difference whatsoever. Even if I don't win here, a vote for the Green Party will still influence how seriously our policies are taken. We're planning private member bills that we can bring anyway on the Green New Deal, and then a people's vote to ratify the deal that we got with the EU. So we do think it was very close to vote leave. Vote leave were fined for cheating. We believe that it should be ratified by the people. If people vote leave again, I will support that absolutely. We would also bring a private members bill, an NHS reinstatement bill, reversing the privatisation that's been happening since 2012 and giving £6 billion of extra funding a year to NHS. We were a great country. We invented machines powered by burning fossil fuels and started the Industrial Revolution. And this has improved the lives of billions of people around the globe. But let's make this country a great country again and show the world how to live prosperous, happy lives without fossil fuels. If you vote Green in this election, your vote will count.
Emma, thank you very much indeed. And as we start to bring this event this evening to a close, there's a few closing remarks I'd like to make myself, please. The first and foremost is probably the obvious one, in that events like this don't happen just automatically and by accident. A lot of great work goes on behind the scenes. I'd like to, on behalf of Castledown FM and behalf of you, thank our expert sound team under the leadership of Mark. This programme, so we'll be putting it out at a future date and time that we'll publicise on Castledown FM. Of course, for those of you who don't know, you can listen to Castledown FM in this local community on 104.7 FM or at castledownfm.com. I'd like to thank all of our panel members for their contribution this evening, regardless of whether you agree with their responses or indeed the direction of their political party. They have offered to serve in public office, and above all else, they've actually given up their time this evening for joining us. So just a final round of applause, please. If you'd like to continue the political discussion, certainly with a local tinge on it, we have a special programme that goes out twice weekly, 2 until 4 in the afternoons, for people to join in on our conversation called Talk of the Towns. And it is, of course, co-hosted by our very own Barry Rose, who spearheaded this event this evening. So, Barry and Steve, the two guys at the back. A reminder, because Barry is waving the book at me, so we would like you to just sign our visitors book before you leave this evening, just so we get a record of who's attended this evening. We did obviously take tickets for this event, but some people have joined us extra. We'd just like to be able to connect to you. Castledown FM, as a community radio station, exists to connect, to inform and to entertain you as our listeners in the local community. You are important to us. We hope that we are important to you. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you for coming along this evening. Well done for those people that were able to ask their question and contribute, and I'm sorry if I didn't get you to ask your question, but thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and good night.
A round of applause, please, for a quite excellent and fair chairman. Yeah.